Hello YouTube and welcome to an all new Elder Scrolls lore video. I am currently in the final push to finish this academic year with a lot of exams and deadlines in the current period, so the upload schedule of this channel has, as you may have seen, come to a grinding halt in the last few weeks. But I still had this script laying around and I had an unexpected free day. So today I made this little video and we will be talking about a small piece of lore that we can find in Skyrim, which I personally found very interesting back when I found it. It's the story of Jarl Elgryr the Unminded and Windhelm's dark days. So while I'm working on some bigger videos and finish my academic year, let's talk about this interesting story in the meantime. Alright, so in the Second Era, likely around the end of the 7th or somewhere in the 8th century of the Second Era, at least 100 years after the event of the Elder Scrolls Online, the city of Windhelm was in quite a bad place. The city was ruled by the infamous Jarl Elgryr the Unminded, of whom almost no historical records remain. Even the character that's on the screen right now is an interpretation from me, what he may have looked like. It was a time of great peril for the people of the city, who were enduring poverty and harsh taxes imposed upon them by their ruler, Jarl Elgryr. Everything was supposedly scarce in the city, from wood to food to even paper. The population was starting to starve and lived in a perpetual cold. Meanwhile, Jarl Elgryr's lifestyle was quite a stark contrast to that of his people, because he lived a life of luxury and held lavish and loud parties openly in the Palace of Kings, something which the people of the city were able to witness as they nearly starved to death. This situation supposedly existed for almost all of his reign, with children growing up for years without any food to go around in the city. Meanwhile, the Jarl's guards cracked down hard on any opposition, with those who openly opposed the Jarl finding themselves dead or in exile in other parts of the province. As the years of his rule grew longer, more civil strife started to happen in his city. Citizens reportedly fought over scraps and started stealing from one another. The lowest class citizens suffered the most, and an outside observer named Liesl Greyheart, who wrote one of the very few fragmented accounts that we have of the time, calls the entire population troubled. But while not all of her account is legible, it's likely that one of the parts which are legible mentions that the Jarl still somehow has supporters among the lower class, despite them suffering the worst under his rule. Why exactly this is, well, we have no idea and we can only really guess baselessly, but I would say that it's likely that Jarl Elgryr probably came to power as a result of some sort of heroic deed he performed or some evil he defeated. Likely a decent hero, only then to prove a very lacking ruler once he came to power. Not all who are good at combat are good at ruling after all, and while this is all speculation, it could explain why some supporters remained, as he could have been some sort of local hero and his fame gave him more than a few excuses for the situation of the city. But his rule over the years became ever more deranged, and he allowed his court mages to experiment on his subjects who did not support him. A citizen, of whom we have some surviving letters, reports that the court mage was walking around at night, casting spells on houses of those who did not support the Jarl, only to then find the inhabitants of those houses dead or deformed the next morning. Elgryr makes less and less public appearances at this time and shows no support for anyone in the city. Apparently even the High King of Skyrim took notice of the bad situation in Windhelm, but Elgryr took no mind of it and turned his mage on those who supported the king. It was around this time that a man named Thessalonicus left his family in Windhelm to head for Solitude and try and organize some kind of fighting force to take over Windhelm violently from the Jarl and end his rule. We don't know whether Thessalonicus had any success, but it seems likely from the letters which survived from the period that this man left the city and unfortunately never looked back, abandoning his wife and children to build a new life in Solitude. It's from these letters that his wife sent him during this period that we have the most information on Elgryr's reign, as these letters survived into the Third Era in some sort of strongbox in Solitude, while Jarl Elgryr's eventual successor destroyed all historical records on his predecessor, likely in cooperation with the other Jarls and the High King at the time, who also seemed to openly suppose Elgryr. Because there was a successor who was able to wipe out Elgryr's entire historical records, because eventually the tide turned on Elgryr and his population eventually revolted as smuggling things into the city became near impossible, and when that happened the people had enough. People had turned desperate, all food was gone from the city, and those who still had the spirit to live gathered at the house of Thessalonicus' wife, Relia, and revolted. The city eventually fell to the rebels, and they ended up storming the palace where the Jarl and his guards still held out. Whether or not they succeeded then is unknown, but we do know that by then the city was desperate, and eventually Elgryr's reign ended and his name was scratched out of history by his successors in the population. The ultimate symbol of repulse and shame for those who'd led them down a horrorish path. And that's basically what we know about the rule of Jarl Elgryr. Like I said, not a very long story, especially since we only have 2 books mentioning him and his reign in the entire lore, as his name was supposedly scratched out of history. And one of the sources is something which survived in a secret stash, which are those letters, and the other is a scrap of a black book from Apocrypha that we can read. But I became very fascinated with the surviving letters, and I found almost nobody on the internet had even bothered discussing them, so I wanted to make a video since I found it very interesting and wondered why no mention of Elgryr is in the Elder Scrolls Online. But then the second era was a few hundred years longer than the Elder Scrolls Online, so like I mentioned before, that means that Elgryr likely had his reign after the events of the Elder Scrolls Online. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, but before I end the video, allow me to say that I hope to see you again in the next Elder Scrolls lore video, hopefully soon when all my deadlines are over. And allow me to thank my top Patreon supporters, Mr. Bernardo Binda, Slav Howard, Gabriel Binda, Polaris Putin, Athena Iodis, King Chris, Scribe of the Scrolls, Doji, Fenrir, Sword of Bushido, Sarmekal, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to these people and all the others on screen that this channel stays alive, and for that I'm very grateful. That said, I hope to see you all in the next Elder Scrolls lore video, hopefully very soon. Bye bye.